Thanks for joining us for another Voice of San Diego podcast bonus episode. I'm Jesse Marx, Associate Editor at Voice of San Diego. We've got 2 new bonus episodes for you this week. The election is right around the corner and we still got a lot to cover. But we've been getting in the weeds with folks running for some of the most high-profile races in San Diego. Coming up now is my interview with Escondido City Councilwoman Olga Diaz. Diaz, a Democrat, is running for the County Board of Supervisors in District 3, which includes Escondido, Encinitas, Solana Beach, Del Mar, and portions of the city of San Diego. The outcome of this race will help determine the partisan makeup of the Board of Supervisors, which currently consists of 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat. The supervisor seat in the South Bay is likely to go Democrat this year. If Democrats can also reclaim District 3, control over the county will change hands overnight. That would be a startling development in only a few years, but here we are. This interview I conducted with Olga Diaz is our first for the District 3 race. In your podcast feed, you can also find Scott Lewis's interview with Tara Lawson-Remer, a professor and former Treasury Department advisor. Supervisor Kristen Gaspar, the Republican who's running for re-election in D3, declined our invitation to be interviewed. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Councilwoman Diaz. So I was hoping to start by, Councilwoman, by getting a sense of your background and why you got into politics. I remember I heard before that you're from Salinas, correct? And I also remember you in a previous interview saying that you moved down to North County for the weather like everybody else, but you discovered how deeply red the area really was. What inspired you to want to run for office considering that?
Sure. So let me circle back to Salinas. It is the lettuce capital of the world and home of John Steinbeck. Born and raised there. And yes, I moved here for the weather. And I picked Escondido primarily because it was so similar to my hometown, size, demographics, big enough to have a hospital and a mall, but not so big that my parents would have to learn how to park in subterranean parking lots, right? Mm-hmm. So my whole family moved here, and I opened a coffee house because it sounded like fun. And that was in downtown Escondido in a historic building, and I was having a great time. Before I moved here, I had researched things like weather and housing prices and crime rates and schools, sort of the basic things that you're looking for in a community that you choose to move to. And I did not, at that time and stage of my life, really look at the politics of the community. Now it's a habit. Everywhere I go, I look up the voter reg status for every place I visit, whether I'm traveling for work or vacations. I just want to know where I am. But yes, it turns out Escondido was at one point rated the 11th most conservative city in the country, and I did not know that when I moved there, and eventually figured it out as part of some former city council actions that were, in my view, considered, racist and anti-immigrant, and really put Escondido in the spotlight for what I consider to be negative issues. And so I started going to council meetings and trying to figure out how to interact and intervene and maybe even have dialogue with these elected folks, and realized that was not going to be very productive. So I ran for office.
So that was 2008. You were the first Latina, and you were also the first Democrat on the city council, correct?
Not in the history of the city. There had been some in the past, but not in a very long time. So actually the year I ran was 2006. I didn't win. I ran on a whim 3 months before an election, and I came pretty close, which is what motivated me to just keep going, because it couldn't possibly be that hard to get elected to local office. It did require quite a bit of obsession, and I did have to overcome political odds that were steep. So at that time, it was like a 20-point Republican voter registration advantage, and I was not a Republican, never have been, lifelong Democrat. But I won in 2008, so that was my second attempt. And I served as the only Democrat for a decade until I recently got a couple of colleagues, and also the voter registration has shifted significantly. Escondido is now just a light blue, baby blue voter registration advantage, and that took a lot of effort as well. So I wasn't the first Democrat, but I did serve as the only one for a decade.
So you mentioned a second ago policies that you considered anti-immigrant and racist. Can you walk us through what you meant by that?
Sure. It began in 2006 with a proposal by former city councilwoman, now assembly member Marie Waldron, and she had proposed some support for a new state law enforcement agency that would serve to increase immigration efforts on behalf of the state of California. Letters were written. It never went anywhere. So then she doubled back and proposed the rental ban ordinance, which prohibited people from renting a place to live in the city, whether it's an apartment, a room, a condo, a duplex, whatever, without first demonstrating their legal residency. And something similar was passed in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and I think that got most of the national attention, but Escondido's mirrored that ordinance. And we were sued, and the city was not successful in implementing that law, so it was thrown out. So then they followed up. There was a council majority at the time that believed in these types of issues. And they followed up with a resolution to make sure that, which is meaningless really, it's just a statement, to make sure that immigration was seen as the cause of all things bad in Escondido. And okay, well that's meaningless, and it's actually still on our books. I'd like to get rid of that before I leave my term in office. And then they followed up with the a concept that if you wanted to park your car on a public street, you would need to get a parking permit for that public street. And in order to get a permit, you would need to have a license. And in order to have a license, you need to be documented. And so at the time, the state of California did not allow drivers to have a license without legal residency. Now there is a mechanism for that. It's not perfect, but at least it's an allowable license process. So really what Marie and her former colleagues were trying to do was make it really difficult to be in the community if you were, in fact, undocumented. And one of the challenges with that is the abrupt way in which they were proposing these ideas didn't take into consideration the fact that anybody that looked Latino was suddenly suspect, right? And so this is the category that I fall into. Suddenly I'm having to answer, and my parents who have U.S. citizenship but heavy accents and always will because they're immigrants, suddenly like we're involved in this feeling that we're not welcome in the community. And that is really the root cause of what made me feel compelled to run for office, to be able to speak up on behalf of people that might not otherwise have that political access or voice. And it was never my intention in my life view and all the plans that I had made. This was not among them, but I felt like I had to step up to the challenge. And it turns out I really like helping people, and holding local office has given me that opportunity beyond anything I could have imagined.
So then you wound up challenging Mayor Sam Abed in 2014, correct?
I did.
And there's a widespread belief that the development project on the former golf course was a major contribution to your loss. And I was hoping we could kind of walk that back for listeners a little bit. So essentially, a land speculator came in, right, and bought the property around 2012, foreclosed on it, and then the following year, the city council changed the zoning to open space on it. And you voted in favor of that decision. And then the speculator, who was Michael Schlesinger, sued and won, and the city put his housing proposal on the ballot as Proper H. Is all that correct?
Some version of that. So he purchased the property out of bankruptcy after its third time falling into bankruptcy, and he actually purchased a bundle of properties, other golf courses within the region. And at that time, Escondido, when he purchased it and said he was going to close it, so the first thing we did was look at our general plan to see, okay, well, what are the possibilities for this property? And it turns out it had always been zoned for housing, always. We had never noticed as a community, even as recently as our 2012 general plan update, that it was zoned for housing because it had been a golf course for close to 60 years, and people just had that as a fixed concept about what that land could be. And so you could blame it on administrative failure. You can blame it on lack of community engagement around really scrutinizing the general plan or the plan update. But at the end of the day, it was zoned for housing. So the reason that it came to the city for a vote to suddenly determine that it would be open space instead of zoned for housing, that was because the residents insisted on that. They collected enough signatures to compel us to do that. And at the time, and luckily all of the council meetings are recorded and stored away if you wanted to go back and watch the footage. But at the time, it was a unanimous vote. All five of us, so 4 Republicans, 1 Democrat, voted to determine that it should be open space. But my words and what actually happened is that was part of making the legal process a little more streamlined. Like, let's just get to the part about the lawsuit, because we knew that as a city council, it was going to be very complicated, that the public was not going to be happy regardless of our decisions, and we knew that a judge was going to eventually intervene. So our unanimous support of it was really like, let's just skip the part where we delay for 6 months of studies and dialogue, and let's just get to that part where, we're in the courts. And so that's why it was a unanimous vote. And as time passed and more information was revealed and studied and, concerns were addressed, I recognize that it's not legal for us to change land use in the way that we did. We always knew that. We knew that even when we voted for it. And also that the lawsuit was going to put the city on the losing end. And at this point, the city was actively involved in the lawsuit. That means it was costing us time and money and staff and stuff. So I was really committed to trying to find a resolution, and that sometimes means compromise, and not everybody was prepared to compromise. And so I took a position of supporting the housing proposal that was brought forward, which actually reduced the number of housing units from the maximum capacity of over 600 to somewhere around, I think it was 342 or something from memory. Those numbers are estimates. And I thought, okay, and we get trails, we get parks, we get single-family housing, which was important to that neighborhood as opposed to condos. And it seemed like everything that the folks in that neighborhood argued that they wanted, they were going to get with this proposal. And so I supported it. And prior to that, I was polling ahead. And mind you, at this point, it's 2014, the voter registration advantage was now 12% Republican, not 20. And so the odds were better for me, and I was well thought of, and I think people had confidence in me. But when I took that position, yes, it hurt me. That's not in and of itself the only reason, I lost. There were maybe other issues, and eventually, I guess I can say I was right. 3 lawsuits later, a variety of participants in those lawsuits, and that land will be eventually housing in a very similar project to what was originally proposed.
Can we stick with housing for a
Sure.
moment? So let's talk about Measure A. For people who don't know, it's a countywide ballot measure that would require most development projects seeking an exemption from the county's general plan to go to a vote of the people of San Diego County. You're in favor of that measure. Can you tell us why?
I'll be voting for it because of the intensity of the race that I'm in for the County Board of Supervisors. I've actively made it clear that I don't have time to engage in campaigning for that prop. But you said it best. It requires any change from the county general plan, any significant change, to go back before the voters. And all that means is that the general plan of the county is frozen at what it is today. It doesn't mean you can't change it, but you would have to go through the general planning process again. But the general plan today allows development. It even has density pockets spread out in sort of a village model throughout the unincorporated parts of the county, and that does not change. So there are still units of development built into the county general plan that, developers, whether they're doing a project or a single-family home, could pursue through the planning and entitlement process. Nothing changes. The only thing that changes with Prop A now, I'm still calling it SOS, but Prop A, is that any significant changes to that plan would then have to be reviewed and scrutinized and voted on by the public. And so the reason I'm comfortable with it is because the city of Escondido has something similar. It's actually Prop S. I heard on the last podcast they call it Prop P, but it was S. By the time I heard it, anyway, so it's Prop S in Escondido, and we've had it for several decades. And it does essentially the same thing. It freezes a general plan. So when we updated the general plan in Escondido in 2012, we went through all the planning, review, EIR, committee meetings, visionings, you name it, 2 years of meetings and study, and then we produced a general plan proposal for the public to vote on, and it was approved, and now it's frozen again. So if we're going to do something significantly different in Escondido, we would have to go back to the voters. And I think that's healthy. But the root cause in Escondido from a couple decades ago and the root cause at the county now is a lack of trust in the planning process. So agencies will have a planning process that includes appointing members, having review committees, talking to the public, creating these plans that people generally agree to, right? And that's trying to build consensus. And then you adopt a plan with your voters, and then you want to change the plan, but you want to sort of cut them out of that process again. That is the root cause of why you see something like the Prop A measure, the SOS measure on the ballot, is that county supervisors have historically approved so many exceptions that people have lost faith in that planning document, or they've lost faith that the board, that the electeds can uphold that planning document. And so this is a symptom of that past behavior. So I'll be voting for it if it passes. I'm not afraid of it. Nothing bad happens. I can say in Escondido, nothing bad has happened. You can drive through the community and you can see our general plan popped density in certain areas, and there's development occurring. We currently have 1,300 units of homes entitled that are not being built. That's a separate issue. That's maybe more of an economic issue, but we have about 1,500 units coming through the pipeline of a variety of housing types. And so we're active. Now, some of the criticism in Escondido has been that we haven't met our RENA numbers, but I'm pretty sure not many agencies have. In fact, you might be able to tell me if any have. I think we've all struggled, right? We also had a significant economic downturn and the loss of redevelopment funding. So those two things have exacerbated what feels like a shortage of housing because we weren't keeping pace, but we were not in normal economic conditions for several years. So S in Escondido, or SOS for the county, Prop A, I don't see significant challenges with that now. And I answer the question the same every time, whether I'm speaking to a development group or a developer or a nonprofit that does affordable housing or an environmental group. It's the same answer every single time. I'm not afraid of it. I will vote for it. I think everything's going to be fine. Nobody has to panic. And as it is, we have thousands and thousands of units of housing built into the current general plan. And so we will focus on making sure that at least those units can move forward as proposed when they come before Planning Division.
So can we talk about the EMB endorsement for a sec?
Sure.
That was kind of interesting. That happened late last year. So they gave you the endorsement, and then they reconsidered the endorsement because they were upset you voted against essentially what would you call it, a mid-sized apartment building in Escondido. And when you went back to talk to the group to make a case for keeping the endorsement, you essentially said to them, as far as I understand it, you should be held accountable on housing issues. You should be able to disagree on specific housing issues. And the larger question you posed was whether or not the EMBs, or just citizens in general, were going to be purist about these issues, or whether they were going to be more nuanced on these issues. And so what you struck at, from my perspective, was this question of trust. And you basically said, just trust me to evaluate which projects are good and which ones are bad. Was that essentially the argument you tried to make to the EMBs?
The trust part, I didn't use those words, but I'll circle back to that. Yes, the reason I got the EMB endorsement on a night when I was in a city council meeting. So I couldn't be present in person, and there wasn't like a Zoom or Skype option for the meeting. So I submitted my questionnaire and had a friend go speak on my behalf. That same night, there were 3 housing proposals on my city council agenda. One was postponed for a later date. We later approved it. One was denied and one was approved, right? So this is a standard practice in local government. We have land use authority. We review housing proposals. And so I had 3 that night. I ended up voting on 2 and later on the other one. So the problem, I think, that arose is that while I was doing my work on the council and the EMBs were addressing my endorsement, that I voted against a project that they feel philosophically should have been approved. It's high density in downtown Escondido, like an urban core area. They consider it near transit. I'm not sure I would consider it quite near transit. Transit is nearby, but it's not really walkable. Anyway, different issue. And so there was some level of offense that I created by denying this project. And I can go into the details of why I denied the project. I think I've already covered that in other areas. But I had to go back and defend my title, right? So they didn't unendorse me outright, but they did invite me to come back and answer for myself. And so I was able to eventually do that at maybe 2 meetings later, and it's just our schedules aligned. So I was there, and I have to say, of all the Democratic Club meetings I've been to, that one was filled with policy wonks, like a lot of really sharp people. Like the level of conversation and the speakers that night, I was just one of them, but there were others, and it was like a very robust dialogue. Like I had fun, right? I'm like, okay, these are my people. They're nerdy. They want to talk about details. Details matter. I love details. So eventually, when I did get to speak and explain that every project that comes before me, I look at individually based on what's being proposed, what impacts there are. There's different levels of scrutiny that I place on projects that are proposed on publicly held land. That's, in this case, that particular project was on a city parking lot in a business district, and there were a lot of people's interests that were at stake. It wasn't a private development on private land that had nothing to do with the city. It was entirely everything to do with the city. So and I gave my reasons at the council meeting. I gave them to the press. I gave them at EMB Dems. Essentially, here's my greatest concern, is that in our angst to create housing in the midst of this crisis, that some people are willing to overlook planning standards and just say, build everything, right? And that's never going to be me. I want quality buildings. I want buildings that are going to be timeless, that people will like to live in, not just when they're brand new, but 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now, that these structures, once they're in place, remain high quality living facilities for people in my community. And so to say yes to everything is unrealistic. And I've always strived to do what's best to create housing opportunities, not just for the housing, but also for the economic development side of that equation in terms of jobs. But having housing go up with no scrutiny or a lack of scrutiny is not a healthy model to be in. We have to have standards for everything. And so I think the part about trust is more like I've earned it, right? Like I can describe to you in detail why I support or oppose pretty much anything. And when things get complicated, I start a spreadsheet, pros, cons, laws, budgets, you name it. And so that is where I should have developed trust. Now, the YIMBY Dem crowd isn't that familiar with North County or Escondido, right? They're more San Diego centric. And so things are different in every community. And I think maybe that's where they just didn't recognize or hadn't seen me do my work in the way that I do my work for a decade or more. They hadn't experienced that. They just knew of me. And I've always supported infill projects. In fact, I pointed out to them that in all my years, I've voted against exactly one infill project, that one, and for reasons I considered significant. And so I was able to retain the endorsement. And they were a fun crowd. And like I said, they had awesome speakers. And I would go back there again. And I feel like it is a friendly crowd.
You mentioned standards a second ago. How do you define high quality in that context? It seems slightly subjective to me.
Actually, it's awesome. In the Escondido General Plan, we have quantified quality of life. There's formulas for everything, like how many books in the library per 1,000 residents, how many cops on the street per 1,000 residents, how many acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. I mean, there's close to 30. And other general plans may have similar things in them, but we have said this is what we think makes a good quality of life in Escondido as determined by our planning process. And so we try to adhere to those things. There's aesthetics also involved in this particular project in downtown Escondido. It's a historic district. I do think historic preservation is important, right? So that's another area where YIMBY Dems might have a slightly different perspective. But if you've been in a historic home or historic building, you can appreciate architecture is different, building standards are different. And so, I think it's important to preserve a history. Escondido has nearly 40 square miles of territory within its jurisdiction, and there are about 4 blocks of that are fairly sacred when it comes to historic preservation in the old downtown, charming downtown that we have had. And so, unfortunately, a lot of those things kind of overlapped, but sometimes you have to choose which is more important. And again, in that same week, in that same month, I approved several hundred units collectively over a variety of projects. And so Escondido is making progress on trying to create infill development opportunities.
Yeah, so one thing that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention is the fact that Escondido created this program which would essentially allow developers to, if I understand it correctly, swap density credits, right? So the idea is that there's a density bank, and if one developer doesn't take advantage of the units per acre, they can essentially put it back into a, for lack of a better term, a pile, and then somebody else can come and grab it later. And the hope of that, right, is to help upzone and to help put people actually closer to where they work and get them out of their cars potentially. So that's a program you're supportive of, I take it?
Yeah, we adopted it. It's called the Density Transfer Ordinance. And so let me explain density bonus and density transfer. So land has zoning on it. So just for ease of use, if you have land that allows you to build 50 units, and some of those units you choose to make affordable, then the state by right gives you the opportunity to take density bonus credits, which means you can densify that land outside of what the city's general plan says, right? So that was one of the proposals that increased density for the project that on Lot 1 in the city of Escondido. Then the city actually totally separate from that. We have a general plan with a downtown district that we have designated. We call it the downtown specific planning area. And so there's a map and it's color coded and you can see which blocks it applies to. And when we updated our general plan, we popped density there. And by that, I mean, like we said, we want 5,000 units of density in this area, right? So we're okay with densification. And what we've come to realize as projects come along is that sometimes they don't use all the density. They leave density on the table. So instead of using everything they could, they left some behind. So we decided overall in that area, we want those units. And so a density transfer ordinance allows us to take unused density and put it into a bank and then possibly offer it to other developers within that footprint as an option so that we can still capture the full density that we imagined as part of our general plan. So we have that as well. So in this, going back to that last project, it was regular zoning plus density bonus, which is a state law that they can take advantage of if they add affordable housing, and then density transfer. So, and that is density transfer is at the full discretion of the city council to allocate. So if we have a bank that has 100 units in it and somebody wants 50 of them, we get to decide if we give them 50 or we say you can only have 20, right? That's at our discretion. So it's a combination of those things. And that is fairly new. And I really think that's a good way to keep your planning documents and your planned growth keep to that script, right? So it allows you to eventually ensure that you can have all of that development where you anticipated having it.
So I just want to clarify, on Measure B, theoretically you should be opposed to that one, right? Given your reasoning on Measure A. And so Measure B specifically would allow for around 2,000, 2,100 homes, I believe it is. But that's outside of the general plan zone, so it would have required an amendment essentially to get done. So do you oppose Measure B?
I'm not supporting Measure B, and I think for folks that know that it's the Newland Sierra project, I think is how most people would recognize it. Before that, it was the Mary Mountains project. So it's like the rebirth of the same thing that people have been opposed to, and it required a county supervisor approval, amendment to the general plan, and so that's why it's on the ballot now to sort of revoke that approval. And that particular scenario is the root cause of why Measure A is on the ballot, right? So again, I don't have time to go campaign for or against these initiatives, but I am supporting A and opposing B.
So can we talk about the endorsements of the mayor? He rescinded it of you a couple of weeks ago, went with your opponent. What happened there?
You'll have to ask him. I got a text message, and a couple days later, I saw the announcement on Facebook that he'd endorsed the other candidate. And I think, my gut feeling is that, he just wants to carve his own path. He's the mayor of Escondido. He rightfully won that position. A lot of people helped him. Sometimes you give people a title or a little bit of power, and they turn into somebody else. And so the only thing I can do is keep working really hard to earn a position as a county supervisor, and I can't spend time trying to analyze that. So one of the most frequent questions I get, certainly in the last 6 months, is Sandag votes and other things have happened.
Oh, we'll talk about those.
Okay, but the most frequent question I get is, what's wrong with your mayor? And I do not take ownership of his words or actions. I just say, ask him. So I'll give you that advice. Go ask him. Maybe he'll tell you. I don't know. We have not had a conversation about it.
So the Democratic Party is officially neutral in this race, right? Can you walk us through what happened there? You were considered the favorite for it, and you came really close to it. But
still the favorite.
Yeah. But what happened though? Because the assumption was that you were going to get it, but you couldn't cross the threshold of a supermajority. So how do you explain that?
Sure. A Democratic nomination process out of the San Diego County Democratic Party has a threshold of 60% of the voting members that need to vote in favor of a candidate for full endorsement. And then there are other things like rating candidates acceptable or actually rating candidates unacceptable, right? And so those are different options that the party has. And so first it goes through what's called an area. And so in my case, it's the north area. So the party is divided into 4 sections. The majority of my district is in the north area. So the north component, members of the north component of the Democratic Party got to make a recommendation to then the full party, right? And so that took place in the summer, many months ago. And I got 58% of the votes that I needed. A couple of the members that would have voted for me weren't present. It's all ratios, right? It's all math, like who shows up that day and what proportion of the people that showed up that are eligible to vote actually vote. A few folks changed their mind. There were a few late additions of new members to that party, to that voting block. So, there were details that I couldn't control. But ultimately, I had a 2-to-1 lead for the endorsement vote. It just fell shy of the 60% threshold. Someday I'll go back and fix that when I have the energy to go back as a central committee member, because that's not how elections work. I don't have to meet a 60% threshold. I just have to have a majority, right? And so we create artificial standards sometimes within our party structure, and I have no idea how the Republican Party does it, but the Democratic Party, we have a lot of rules and bylaws and nuances, and somebody will find an exception to the rule, and then we spend time trying to create a new rule to prevent that from happening again. And so it's very challenging to explain it all. But yes, I fell short. And so both myself and my Democratic opponent are rated equally qualified, I think, or qualified is what they rated us, which essentially means they took no position. And so we move on. But I do have the majority of the Democratic Club endorsements that have endorsed in this race, a strong majority. Several of them, clubs endorsed me unanimously. So I feel like I am still the favored candidate, primarily because of my legacy of work, the challenge of the work that I had to do in North County for a long time, relationships I've built over years. And, I've worked side by side with my fellow Democrats on a lot of issues, and people remember that. So I still feel very committed to being a good, strong Democrat.
One more endorsement question for you.
Sure.
So the largest union, which is of county workers, which is SEIU, has supported your opponent. But you've got, as far as I can tell, you got the electrical workers and a couple other folks. What explains the divided loyalties among labor in this race, from your perspective?
Okay, so I do have IBEW, the electrical workers, 569, UA 230, those are plumbers, pipe fitters, iron workers. So where I did not get SEIU or laborers, 911, I got Teamsters. I got a lot of them, right? So yes, it's a divide similar to what you saw in the Democratic Party, where there are significant supporters on both sides, but no consensus on the ultimate candidate to support. So I look at the support that I got as legacy support. These are folks that I've worked with who have helped me for many years, who know my work, who've seen me, at council meetings or coastal commission meetings or river park meetings. Like they know what I am. I have a very well documented, political history, and my votes are recorded, right? So there's no guessing with me. They know where my strengths are. I think there's some legacy stuff going on with my opponent's family. So, for example, and I've never met him, but I'm going to say his name, Larry Reamer, used to be the consultant for a lot of the unions that have supported his daughter now. And so I think there's that. I can't tell you how many elected officials have said to me that are supporting her, I'm sorry, I know you're the most qualified candidate, but I've known her or I've known her dad for a long time, right? And think, okay, that's social capital, right? And I've got friends that help me too. And so I understand that. I don't come to the table with that same social capital. I made it to this point in time pretty much like, bopping my way through and figuring it out on my own. I love my parents, but they don't always know what I'm doing or what I'm up to. And so it's a different level of effort and personal effort and influence and life path that put myself and Tara in this moment at this time. And so I have the support that I've built myself, and she has certainly built some as well, but I think a lot of it is legacy support for her from her family and her family's involvement in politics in this area. That's my best guess.
Is there also any legacy animosity involved? Because I know you angered the UFCW a couple of years ago when you voted in favor of a 99-cent store. So
I didn't. Oh, let's see. How do we go back to this? The only person that I upset was Mickey Kasparian at the time. And yes, he has obviously UFCW and Laborers, and Labor was split for a while. They broke up into two different groups. Now they're back together again, right? I wasn't the cause of any of that, but I was strong-willed and confident enough in my position on my city issue that when Mr. Kasparian texted me kind of an order and I didn't take it, it turned into something, right? So, it was a lot of social media attacks. I never responded. In fact, I think that was the last time Voice invited me to do a podcast. You wanted me to tell you what happened, and I declined that invitation. But I also I didn't kiss the ring, right? There were a lot of people, you have to make it right with him. I'm like, no, I don't, because I didn't do anything wrong, right? I know what I voted on. I know what the issue was. And so as I've re-entered sort of a bigger political platform and people are asking questions about this, and I say, I never had a problem with Labor. Mickey Kasparian had a problem with me. That's it. There is nothing more than that. I've always been a very strong supporter of Labor. Both the unions in my city that I've, had an opportunity to participate in labor negotiations there, and the unions that are supporting me for this race. And I have a very clear, I place very clear value in working families and good paying jobs and benefits, and that's not a secret. So the only bump in the road for me ever was the fact that I did not take orders from Mickey Kasparian. Now, just like with so many other issues, I was right. And I was right alone for a long time until, people like that eventually implode on their own. And so now looking back on it, I'm glad that I didn't bend and break under that kind of pressure. I knew I was right and principled. And I could say to folks, if I knew who to say it to, I told you so. I was right.
Let's get to those Sandag questions.
Sure.
So the regional sales tax program that's known as Transnet is essentially it's not running out of money, but it's bringing in less than expected, right? Which means that not all the projects that were promised to voters are going to happen. Hassan Akrada, who's the executive director there, has said he would like to prioritize transit projects when he's figuring out which projects are deserving of funding over the long term. And I know that we all know that that's angered quite a few folks in North County, and specifically the two supervisors who represent North County up there. What do you make of this? How would you prioritize transit versus roads funding?
So let's go back to Transnet and the fact that it's not generating the revenue that was believed to be necessary in order to produce all of the projects that were presented as part of that ballot initiative, right? So people were told, if you vote for the sales tax increase, these are all the projects that are going to get done over time. And actually Voice of San Diego, did the best investigative journalism and calculations about the Transnet dollars. There was never going to be enough to do everything that was promised, which is why Sandag, before Hassan came, was trying to float another Transnet to sort of, support that Ponzi scheme that they had going. And so they needed more money. And so I guess if you want to, if anybody wants to be upset about dishonesty, it really was historical dishonesty. There was never going to be enough money, right? Now you have a significant transition. You have a new executive director. You have a lot of political shifts throughout the county, and so the balance of representation has shifted on Sandiag. But what I really like about Hassan is I like his directness, and I like his honesty, and I like the fact that he's making us face our challenges around transit, right? That is honest dialogue that he is producing. And I hear discomfort about, Sandiag used to be so harmonious and now is so acrimonious. And I think, you know what? There doesn't need to be harmony in democracy. There needs to be scrutiny. And under the current circumstances, I think that's what our representatives on Sandiag should be doing, is scrutinizing plans and dollars and figuring out how we're going to get ourselves to the next level of transit in our region. So the thing that I had hoped would be more popular is the 5 big moves, the study of our transit system in this area, including roads and public transit and bikes and scooters and every different component, trains, all of that was going to be studied over the course of 2 years. That study would produce some suggestions about how to fix the fragmented portions of transit to make it more effective, and then eventually put a price tag on it, because we're not even talking about money for any of these future projects until we have a plan, right? This is a standard thing in local government. We plan, we put a price tag on it, we figure out how we're going to pay for it, and sometimes that means we have to go to the voters, right? This is very common. Nothing here is special in terms of what's being proposed. What happened is getting derailed from the old promises that were made under the old Transnet funding model that, again, we all know it was never going to be enough money, and people feeling disillusioned that they're not going to get all those projects. But that is not the direct result of the current planning effort. And you think about over time, planning processes and concepts and crises, they change. So 10 years ago, we were not talking about high-density urban infill near transit. Those were not words that were common, right? I know because I was around. And now we're talking about those things and talking about multimodal transit systems and talking about connecting transit methods, and even as recently as last week, talking about merging transit systems, right? Like, these are all concepts that are worthy of discussion and dialogue. And when you have people that want to derail discussion and dialogue by fear-mongering, that's where you create this turmoil. And I think that, both of our current county supervisors on Sandiag have really used that as a tactic. I listened to the podcast when you had Supervisor Desmond in, and I believe he sounded to me like a climate science denier. And I think, okay, well, if it doesn't make sense to him to improve transit and mobility because of climate, then maybe he needs to understand it from the perspective of cost, right? If, in fact, we can fix our transit system, our public transit system, and take 5, 10, 15% of drivers off the road and into public transit, then we no longer have to invest in road expansion, right? And so from a climate perspective, road expansion just induces traffic. And that's what studies say. I believe in studies and data and science. And so those are the things that are that I place my confidence in. But if that doesn't do it for him, then how many billions of dollars do we need to keep building roads, right? And you need to look at the economic impact of continuing to do business as usual. And so I am a big supporter of the honesty that Hassan brings to the discussion about transit. I'm not the main person that goes to Sandiag. I'm the alternate, but I listen to them. When there's something controversial going on, I get all the agendas, I get all the reports and stuff. So I would have voted to support the 5 big moves. And I don't like fear-mongering. I feel like that's not the honest way to engage a community. I'd rather have dialogue. I don't need to be right all the time, but I need to be thinking all the time. And if I take the approach of embellishing or getting people riled up, I feel like that's not the best way to do the work. So my preference is to be maybe very boring, but extremely precise.
You mentioned this possible merging of transit systems. I remember Hassan a couple of days ago actually had proposed possibly that the Metropolitan Transit System, known as MTS here locally in San Diego, and North County Transit District might actually combine to form one agency. Is that something you might be in favor of?
I'd be in favor of analyzing that as a concept. In fact, in my city, I have 2 school districts. I have an elementary and a high school district, and a couple of times in the past, those 2 districts have talked about merging. There are other examples like water districts that have talked about Rainbow and Fallbrook merging. And in that merger discussion is when you do the financial analysis to determine like who has more debt operationally, what your staffing model might be. This is not something you say, yeah, let's get together and merge these agencies, right? It's not that easy, but I think it's important to have the discussion because what we will find is whether that's really a good idea or not, and whether we need to pursue it or move on. But I can say it seems logical to have one transit agency for the whole county, because that transition point between the North County Transit District and the MTS district, it's not very smooth. I'll give you an example. I work for a college that opened a campus in another city, and so the college district is very large. And so the transit that serves the main campus is NCTD, but the other campus is served by MTS. And
you're talking about Palomar?
I do. I work at Palomar, yeah. And so it was a challenge when we opened the new campus to figure out how to get transit, buses to go to the new campus, or to connect schedules in a way that made sense, so students that might be attending both campuses could easily use transit to make it from one place to the next. And I think that conversation then required 2 agencies and a whole bunch of administrative staff in all these places to be able to just, try and get an answer to that question. So something as complicated as transit really needs to be, I think, cleaned up at this point. If I had to come here today on a bus or using transit from where I started to how I got here, I would have been very nervous, possibly late. Possibly I would have had to start early this morning just to figure it out. I'm very intimidated by this process, right? So I think a couple of things are important. We need transit tutors, right? If I wanted somebody to teach me how to use a transit system, like I want to be able to call somebody and say, show me how to get to downtown, or show me how to get to work, or show me. Right now that's not possible because the transit system is so fragmented. It would create some angst. And the apps aren't perfect and the schedules are wonky. And so whatever we can do to make the bureaucracy and the logistics of using public transit smoother, I think we need to actually do that.
A UCSD professor, just as a side note, told me yesterday that she gives anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes leeway for some of her students because they're taking public transit to get there, and she knows they're going to be late. She's actually started budgeting that into her days and her lesson plans. That's
not cool. I mean, that's cool of her, but that speaks to what a challenge it is to use it, and it shouldn't be that way, right? And so if you want to incentivize ridership, just make it work on time, make it simple.
So you've highlighted homelessness as one of your priorities. What would you change about the county's approach to homelessness?
Well, I think definitely we need more social workers to engage with, on the front lines with people that have chronically homeless challenges, whether it's mental health, addiction, loss of a job, lack of training. There are a variety of issues. So homelessness isn't sort of a one-size-fits-all, issue to solve, but more social workers for sure. The county engages in a lot of contracting with nonprofits and social service agencies within the region, and I think that's healthy. But having worked at one in the past, I know the metrics for helping people were more like, how many did you sign up for food stamps, or how many did you send to employment training? And that works for some people as a support, but that in and of itself isn't taking people off the streets. So I went on a ride-along with the deputy sheriff in Encinitas because that's the agency that, I'll be more working closely with when I'm a supervisor. And the night we went out on a ride-along, there wasn't any crime in Encinitas, which was awesome, but all of the calls were social service calls, right? So we're rolling around in a police car trying to help people with no pamphlet of information, a car that can't fit all their stuff. They usually have stuff. Trying to figure out, it was a Sunday night, like what's open that we can refer people to. Because when somebody's in trouble, rightfully so, folks call 911. They should. And once a deputy gets there and determines that there's no crime and no danger, and it's really a call that requires more of a social worker, they should be able to call somebody, and that structure does not currently exist. If it did, I would say folks should still call 911. Deputy shows up and then determines that, he can hand that call off to a team of social workers that come in and then do the wraparound services, the assessment, the figuring out where this person came from, where they need to be, if they need to be medicated, see a doctor, find family members. That is not what our deputies are trained to do. And so they try their best. I witnessed extreme compassion and effort, but that's not their skill set. Right. So we really need to pivot to be able to have the right people helping when these things come up, instead of making it a law enforcement issue. And I think that's one of the significant things I can do as a county supervisor is help create those structures so there is somebody to hand off some of these calls and these people to that are appropriately trained.
So part of your pitch is that you've helped lay down political infrastructure for the Democratic Party in North County, and you've helped change the narrative up there. Now the city councils in Escondido, Carlsbad, and Encinitas are majority Democrat, which probably would have been a crazy thing to consider just 10, 12 years ago.
It was crazy.
At the same time, in the 2016 election, you were pretty open about the fact that Dave Roberts was not your choice for county supervisor at the time. Couldn't it be argued that maybe you worked against the party interest in 2016? How do you factor that into your larger pitch to voters?
No, actually, there are now Democrats in Vista and San Marcos, too, and that was unheard of as well. So it goes beyond that. In Escondido, one of our school boards is now majority Democratic as well, and that was unheard of. And so laying the foundation means, I kind of kicked in the door and then just made sure that I kept working to be able to register voters and engage voters. And so that's part of what you referenced. But Dave was my friend when he ran in 2012. Was that when he ran, 2012? I helped him. I helped him in Escondido as much as I could, and he got elected. I think his shortcomings were his own making. If you'll remember, he left among some significant allegations of, from his office staff. I didn't do that to him. He did that to himself. So Dave received the party endorsement. My biggest objection to him was that he didn't help Democrats the way I described I did. I made it in and I helped people. And there are a lot of Democrats that credit me for, mentoring, for explaining, for showing them the logistics of, how campaigns work. I did that for people. The person who did it for me the most was Francine Busby. She helped me when I didn't know what I was doing. So I've always felt compelled to pay it back. Run Women Run is an organization that does the same for women. So I feel like I've always helped Democrats move forward and inspired them, encouraged them, nurtured them. I didn't support Dave in his re-election campaign, and that was somewhat personal. He didn't help me when I ran for mayor. In fact, he was very closely aligned with Sam Abed. So yeah, I didn't put any effort into him, but I put effort into other candidates. And so the way I look at it, I support people that inspire me. And at this point, I'm spoiled because I want to know the people I'm voting for and working for and donating to and knocking on doors for. Like, I want to believe in people. And if I don't, then I don't help you and don't really work against you, but I've got better things to do supporting candidates that I believe in.
In 2015, you attended a Lincoln Club dinner with Jason Rowe, which
I did.
People started talking about. And so Jason has run Kristen Gaspar's campaigns. He's a prominent Republican consultant, strategist, and the two of you have been friends for a couple of years. Jason told us a couple of weeks back that the two of you used to talk quite a bit, and you talked quite a bit during that campaign. He said that you've relayed information to him about Democratic Party strategies at the time. Is that so? How do you explain your relationship with Jason? So
I did go to that Lincoln Club dinner. It was like being on the Death Star. It was awesome. The invitation from Jason was primarily because he didn't like Mayor Sam Abed, and so we had that value in common. And he said, "Hey, Sam's going to be at this dinner. If you're there, he's going to be upset." And I said, "I will be there." And so that's actually the first time I met Kristen Gaspar was that same night. And Jason actually ran the campaign for Prop H, which is the golf course development that we started talking about at the beginning of this podcast. So that's actually how I met Jason was, when I decided to endorse that measure, I was able to give him information about why. I think he did a video, with like advertisements. And so I helped with Spanish and English content for that. So Jason is smart. He loves his wife. He loves his son. He loves eating Spam, which is absolutely disgusting. I know that about him. I get Christmas cards from him. I don't dislike him. I have nothing bad to say about him. he is a fierce competitor, and I know he's supporting Kristen. And so I'll see him on the other side of this election, maybe. And I think I can share that in terms of strategy, I described to you how the Democratic Party works. It's got areas, it's got votes, it's got percentages. None of that's a secret. Their meetings are open. There wasn't really anything special that I knew that could help him. But I do know that, he had a disdain for my former mayor that I share with him. And so, we talked about that kind of stuff. But I didn't win an election for Kristen, and I didn't lose the election for Dave. I just simply wasn't that involved in that particular race. I had other races I was engaged with.
Those meetings, just to be clear, they're only open to Democrats, though, right? Like Jason couldn't walk in the door and
you can
attend one of those.
They're open to anybody. You can't speak if you're not a voting member. There are rules about whether you can take the floor or not, and certainly whether you can vote on issues or not. But they're open. In fact, I see reporters there all the time. The only time we have closed meetings is if there's something controversial to discuss. So, for example, I was on the Central Committee when the Bob Filner vote came up about whether we were going to unendorse him or disassociate ourselves with him. That was a closed-door meeting. So you had to be a voting member. They check your, registration at the door in terms of, your eligibility to vote as a member of the party. But no, the meetings are open. They're once a month generally, and the membership attends. There's guests. People bring their kids. Neighbors. People that are advocating for or against issues, propositions, whatever. They come. So they're open.
So the Lincoln Club, just for people who don't know, is a very conservative club. Was it taboo at the time to go to a Lincoln Club dinner? Was that considered?
I saw other Democrats there, actually. I was surprised. I had never been to one. I'd never been a part of anything. Lincoln Club they're not a part of something that I had engaged with in the past. Now, remember, Escondido was in North County, maybe had minimal relevance to San Diego politics or big issues, and so I don't think I was relevant to them. But I saw several other Democrats there, and I thought that was interesting. I'm a big proponent of going any place I'm invited to, even if, I don't get uncomfortable. Like, I just want to go see how does that work. And so whether it's a black tie event or, going to the swap meet in Escondido, I cannot be made uncomfortable at this point. I've had so many life experiences. I'm just rolling with it. Right. So this particular Lincoln Club dinner was at the Hotel Del. Like I said, it was like the Death Star, like all the Republicans were there. Right. That just, to me, these are people I've seen on TV, but I'd never actually met or worked with, right? And so everybody was very polite. It was very civilized. They had a speaker who owns an ice cream company in Arizona who was talking about tax policy. And I just remember thinking, he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? But it wasn't, an experience. And so it's fine. I don't know. It's not that interesting.
I analyzed voter registration data last year and found that actually in 2018, it was the vast majority of Latinos were registering as independents, actually. And I started talking to some advocates about it, and one guy told me that Latinos were sick and tired of the lip service that they were getting from the Democratic Party, and they felt that they couldn't totally trust either of them, even though they primarily voted with the Democrats. They were registering as no party preference types. What do you make of that argument, or what do you make of that fact?
My guess is that they were talking about national politics, not local elected officials.
Yes.
And so that's how they make that determination. Cory Booker dropped out of the presidential race today, right? And so the only remaining person of color is Andrew Yang that hasn't dropped out, if I'm correct. Julian dropped out, Kamala dropped out. So it's a rough field. I can't answer for why it's like that, but I've been a Democrat since the day I turned 18. I've always found kinship with the party and the values of the party, but sometimes the bureaucracy, can be a little tricky to navigate, but I'm a Democrat. And that's not going to change. In terms of whether Latinos feel like they should pick a party, I think it's important to remember that there are a lot of family values in the Latino community that more closely align with what Republicans have espoused that they believe in. A lot of things around choice, faith, family. I think there's not one party that is everything to everyone, right? So In my family, we have different levels of dysfunction, but we are 100% political alignment in my household. But that's not the case everywhere. So no, I guess I don't have an answer. In North County, I was the first. Well, in Escondido, I was the first Latina elected in the history of the city. Now Consuelo's there, so there's two of us. But when I got elected, the only other Democrat in North County was Esther Sanchez. She's got staying power, right? And she was very helpful in explaining to me that people are going to, send things at you that you are not expecting, and you just have to weather it with grace. And so I appreciate those words from her early on. Now there's lots of us, right? I was at a League of Cities meeting before I came here today, and there's Karina and Vista, and then there's Maria in San Marcos, and Alejandra in National City, and there's more of us. And so I think eventually the Latino community will see themselves in the elected bodies that are representing them, and maybe that will soothe or cause a realignment.
So Trump administration policies in 2018 forced the county to quickly grapple with family separations at the border, and there was a decrease, as I remember, in funding for refugee services. Nathan Fletcher, who's the supervisor who represents most of San Diego, he promised to create a new, basically, immigrant affairs office. It's supposed to be presented later this year, he says, and it would help families enroll kids in school. It would also help them start small businesses, obtain driver's licenses, and more. Given Escondido's history, the policies you mentioned earlier, as well as its past of openly partnering with federal immigration authorities, what would you do as supervisors for refugees and immigrants, and given this history in this context?
So I love that Nathan takes on all of these challenging and visionary projects, and so I'm eager to get there to be able to help him. This is a great idea. When I was first elected, I was invited to go on a visit to Israel with a delegation of elected officials from San Diego County. So Tony Atkins went, Jim Desmond went, Chris Orlando, there were a bunch of us that went. And one of the things that we saw while we were there for about a week, looking at everything from education, medical, law enforcement, resource uses, like we were looking at topics that involved government interaction at every point. But one of the things that we spent some time on was the fact that they have an immigrant absorption program. So if you move to Israel, you have the choice of participating in this absorption program where you learn how they do things in their country in terms of money, education, buying a house, like finding a job, and they guide you through that. And it's kind of like a dormitory style living, almost like a training, right? And I thought, wow, that's a really great idea, because that is a challenging thing when you move from one country to the next, even from one city to the next. Like, how do I do stuff, right? So that seemed to be a very humane way to look at immigration. And so I've always kept that idea at the back of my mind, which is very much what Nathan is proposing. The city of San Diego has got an immigrants advocacy staff position as well. The city of Escondido cannot afford to do something like that on its own. So what I really like is the concept that eventually there will be alignment among multiple agencies to help fund this work, and that you can be a resident of San Diego County in any of the cities and still have access to these services. So I love the JPA model, the Joint Powers Authority model. I really think that's something to double back and explore. Like, can every city be asked to contribute some either finances or resources of some sort to make something like this possible? Because even just today on NPR, they were doing a story on the lost value of immigrants that come here with significant skills from their home country, but the licensing issues in this country are very difficult to overcome. So they might be doctors in their home country, and they come here and they can't get a job being a doctor, and it's a long haul to get back to that. But they have skills that we could, make use of. And so why waste that energy? And so the Immigrant Absorption Center and immigrants sort of welcoming them, whether they're refugees or immigrants that just make their own way here. I think that's a really great thing to do for humanity and also for the economy. Let's put people in the most valuable place that they can be, and they come here to work. They want to be productive. So the sooner we help them accomplish that, achieve that, I think the better off our whole region is.
So you do have the support of Nathan Fletcher. What do the two of you disagree on? Anything major?
It's funny. Both Nathan and I'm comfortable disagreeing with people, right? I've got friends that I don't agree with on every issue. And so I don't have any fights with Nathan, right? It doesn't come to that. I think we have different positions on Prop A. I'm okay with that. If we ever have to debate, we will, but it's not a matter of like me being mad that somebody disagrees with me. You have to remember, I came up in a political environment that was so toxic that I have learned to be disappointed and I have learned to really appreciate any little win. So I don't get hung up on disagreement. So I'm excited about the prospect of working with Nathan. Of course, there'll be a new supervisor in District 1 and District 2 as well. So there'll be new people. And so there's good work to do. How I imagine it is, I'll walk in with my to-do list and he has one, and maybe we'll take different, like, okay, you take the lead on this one, I'll take the lead on that one. Because the truth is there's good work to be done. And that's what I'm eager to do. And I know that's what Nathan has demonstrated since he's been there. He hustles. He's always working on stuff and not just easy, low-hanging fruit things, like serious issues. And so I look forward to being able to be his colleague.
Councilwoman, is there anything I didn't ask you but should have?
Well, my favorite color is blue. I wear a shoe size 8. I don't know. I really appreciate the time that you've given me to be here. I'm impressed with your work. I listen to your podcasts. I laugh when you guys make jokes. I don't think I made any good ones, so this might be the most boring podcast you ever recorded, but I've enjoyed my time here. Thank you for the real questions and giving me the opportunity to respond. So.
Okay, you bet. Thank you for coming in.
Of course.
Thanks for listening to this Voice of San Diego podcast bonus episode. You can keep up with all of our political coverage with the Politics Report newsletter. Get that at vosd.org/newsletters. We'll be dropping more bonus episodes in this feed ahead of the March 3rd primary, so keep an eye out. I'm Jesse Marx, Associate Editor at Voice of San Diego. This show is produced by Nate John, Megan Wood, and Adriana Heldes, and recorded in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio, which is sponsored by the Bob Nelson Charitable Fund. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.